Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Vibe. In SAT Lesson 4, we'll be going over science and database. The lesson objectives are to learn what science and database questions are and to understand how to tackle science and database questions. The SAT does not have an official science section like the ACT, but its passages in the reading section may be specific and require an understanding of the data. To succeed, you need to know how to recognize and understand the basic features of and concepts related to the provided information. Examine critically the relationship between the information provided and the conclusions drawn or hypothesis developed, and generalize from given information to gain new information, draw conclusions, or make predictions. If you want to do well in reading questions that involve science and database components, you need to know how to master each of these steps. Study method. Like all of the other question types, the key is to practice, practice, and practice. Do a practice test first, and from it, you should get either A, what you can do intuitively, B, what you can do consistently but with some thought, C, what you get wrong sometimes during practices, and D, what you get wrong consistently. Likewise, D and C are your top priorities. You should find review materials for the question types in these categories. However, when practicing these questions, don't put too much time pressure because especially in science and database questions, the data in it takes time to understand and you want to analyze correctly. So you need to take time. Of course, still go within the time constraints, don't take too much time, but don't put unnecessary pressure on yourself. Also, don't waste time by practicing A because you know how to do those already. And when you see yourself improving topics considered D and C, start practicing under time conditions and add B to this practice. Science passages. So, there are a few common elements of science passages in the SAT and common themes of questions that they ask that you should know about. So, these science passages normally contain the aim, process, and results of a scientific study. Empirical evidence will also be a part of it, evidence about the study as well as about background research. Peer evaluation, which is what other scientists or other professionals in the field have to say about the study, and background information about the subject. So this includes definition, comparing and contrasting, classification, and examples. Questions will often ask you to either support or reject a theory. Now, common reasons for you to reject a theory include reasons based on evidence. For example, if it's insufficient, weak, or outdated evidence. Also, the size of the sample. If the sample size is not big enough, right, then it's not convincing evidence, so you should reject the theory. Also, whether the experiment can be replicated or is representative. If an experiment was done just once by one person and cannot be replicated to the same results again, then it's likely not a reliable experiment and should not prove a theory. If it's also not representative, for example, if the subjects selected or if the things studied are not representative of the topic as a whole, um, and is not selected scientifically, then it's also not representative of the entire subject and should not be used to prove a theory. Also, perceptions on the same evidence. Types of evidence that you may come across include empirical evidence, which is citations, the review of literature, experiments, statistics, questionnaires, survey, basically a lot of stats involved, like a very hard evidence. There's also speculation and anecdotal evidence, which are stories, which aren't as scientific and as rigorous as empirical evidence. Question types. These are some of the common question types that you'll encounter in science and database questions. Graph and table interpretations, perhaps the most important one. This requires you to understand the trends, relationships, and figures from graphs and tables. You also need to know how to relate data with text. This involves comparing information from a passage to the graphs and tables that support it. Also, you need to understand, does the data support claims in the text and how it does? Inference questions. This means you draw conclusions based on the data provided, and it requires you to predict data based on the information that it gives you in the text. So as you can see, all of these question types require you to have intuitive understanding of both the text and the data, and you need to be able to relate the two. This is required in order for you to conduct the analysis to answer these questions. Let's go over some practices to practice these concepts. Practice question 1. This is a group of 2 questions that are relating to the 2 graphs shown below. Take a minute or 2 and try to answer it. Okay, so hopefully you've had a go at it. Let's go through them one by one. So for question 20, you need to identify that the positive emotion is the solid line in the graph, and the change in human raters assessment of the speaker's emotional state is on the x-axis, so you find the y value of the solid line when x is equal to 1, as the change in the rater's assessment of speaker's emotional state needs to be 1. Now the y value when x is 1 is 4, so the answer would be D. In question 21, in both figures, the positive emotion line is above the negative emotion line. A greater y value means a greater self-reported amount of emotion, so the figures consistently show that positive emotion is being reported more. Hence, the answer is A. Let's move on to practice 2. Again, take a moment and try to answer this by yourself before resuming the video. Okay, let's go over each of the answer choices. In this question, A is wrong because it says that oxygen went up in the Alboran Sea, but the graph clearly shows that it went down, so this contradicts what the data says. C is wrong because it says that oxygen dropped near Mauritania, but the graph shows that it stayed high there, so again, this is not consistent with the data. D is also wrong because it mixes up which place had more oxygen and doesn't explain the coral decline. B is the only option that is correct because in the Alboran Sea, oxygen went down at the same time the corals declined, so the two are linked, and it is the correct answer. As you can see in this type of question, you need to match the answer choice with the information in the text, with the data provided in the text as well. So you need to make sure everything agrees. This is one of the aspects of database questions that makes it perhaps a bit more challenging for many students than regular reading passages, because there are more aspects to consider and everything must fit together. That brings us to the end of this video. Remember, visit vikinginitiative.com for more AP, IB, and standardized testing resources. If you have any questions, join the SAT group chat and ask our tutors. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.